And we're back to reality again. Let's just straighten some things up, do some house cleaning. There we go. Welcome, folks. I'm back. Yazoo's back. Back again. Michael's back. Tell a friend. Testu's back. And as you might have noticed, if anyone was paying attention to things, I just put the new logo for the company down. Hopefully it looks like, I think it's the final design, official logo for the new entity. Hoping to expand my brand reach and become a little bit more relevant and reflect what I want to do with this whole entity. Anyway, what can I say? It's me. It's me again. And me attempting to do something I didn't do before, which is actually put myself on a schedule. Me, a person that's never really had schedules most of his life, except for when I had to, when I had a job, and all those lovely things, and when I have work to do that I've got responsibilities I have to take care of. Me, the person that never bothered to have it, and of course my camera goes down. Thank goodness, because it took so long. I'll turn it back on again. There we go. I should have put it in record mode because for some reason, how do I get that to work? Anyway, I'll leave it alone. It seems to be fine for now. Anyhow, enough said about me, okay? How are you folks out there on the land of the internet? Listen, I have a couple announcements, one sort of housekeeping nature. A while back, when I was playing with this, attempting to set this out on YouTube long before I had a channel specifically, officially on here, and my own media group channel, which this is one of, hopefully going to be several channels to be on here eventually. I created a sub-channel under my own personal ID a long time ago, of which I've got 6 subscribers, a whole 6 subscribers. Unfortunately, those 6 subscribers do not subscribe to this one because they never knew about it. So what I'm going to have to do is rustle them peoples over here and join this channel and become part of the new channel, and hopefully several other people will eventually decide to join too. And then this will be a great place to be for me to come to, and hopefully a place for you to come to visit with me in not the digital basement, but my basement. Okay, I'm not Adrian's basement. I like Adrian Black. He's a very interesting and a very, very provocative host for a show, former Canadian, now part of the American story, and a lot of Canadians, Americans. I was partly in the States for a while, so I understand. I mean, if it doesn't seem like a different culture, but it really is, especially if you're not used to being there, especially if you've never been there before, and you all of a sudden spent most of your life in Canada, seeing it from America through the lens of Canadian, and then from afar and seeing sort of distance, and then actually seeing the real thing and realizing that these people are real people, that they have different ways of doing things, because that's just the way people are. Anyway, enough about me talking about where I was and where I will be. The topics today, okay. What can I say? We're right now going through the thing with the commission discussing why we had the trucker protest. This is fortunate side effect of our government. The legislation does require the government to actually explain to everybody why it thought it needed a protest to be quashed, and what the justification for the measures it took, the most drastic measure it took to do that. So we're going to be seeing some interesting topics. I'm not going to talk about all the testimony myself. There's other channels out there that are doing a greater job on that. They're covering it much more extensively than I will ever bother to. All I can tell you is the fact is that we have to be able to establish the fact that in Canada, Canadians have the right to protest when the government is doing something that is perceived wrong. Also, we need to recognize there's going to be people that are not going to like this protest for various reasons. They're going to vilify it in any way, shape, or form because they just don't understand why people want to protest, because they don't understand why they think the government is doing anything wrong, because as far from their point of view, they trust the government implicitly to do things right all the time. And this is why we have commissions, because of the fact that we can't trust any government, whether it be conservative, liberal, 100% implicitly all the time for everything. Governments consist of people. And people have agendas, people have opinions. Sometimes you agree with them, sometimes don't. And I know myself, I'm sure there's probably going to be people, once they know from my channel and actually know that I exist, they're going to have different and varying opinions of me. And things I hold on to, believe, sacred cows you might call them. And this is okay. This is part of the discussion. I'm not right about everything. I'm not wrong about everything. I have a nuanced position that may be different from yours. And I believe the trucker protest was necessary. I don't totally agree with how they totally went about it. I really do think that bringing down all those trucks was asking for trouble to some degree eventually, because the government was going to use whatever it could to quash the protests, including the media, to help quash the protests by exposing it for what they want to call as insurrection. I don't call it insurrection. I don't think it was. I think it was a peaceful protest for the most part. There were probably fringe elements that do get involved in these protests. They're not always necessarily invited, but they invite themselves to these things because ultimately they have agendas of their own. And they, of course, are going to express that agenda no matter what the original agenda of maybe the people that originally organized it were. And there's even people within the groups of organizers that probably have a slightly different agenda, way they want to approach it, or maybe have alternate agendas that might be mixed in there, which the government or any other person on the side is going to catch on to as a justification for the quashing of this particular protest, specifically because it was so long. The only lesson I think the government has to get out of this, I think not just the government but also the opposition parties, especially the NDP, who are not really an opposition party anymore. They've ceased becoming an opposition party. They're a party pretending to be an opposition party, but they're actually a de facto version of the government. A government without ministers. Governments, they're like an extension of the backbencher, the little party with Jagmeet Singh being like a super backbencher. He has no real direct power. He's not a minister of anything. He certainly has an opinion. Well, I don't agree with all his opinions. I mean, I understand there's some opinions I may agree with, some I disagree with. Most of his opinions I disagree with firmly for various reasons. I'm not going to get into here. We can have discussions about that some other time. But the thing is that he is realizing the fact that the NDP, as far as relevance in the Canadian politics, has always been, for the most part, because of it being more of a left-leaning party than a right-leaning party, more aligned with liberals and liberal values. But they're like, I call them liberal light. Half the rhetoric, all the bravado. Like a light beer. And so Edmonton's just a long list of leaders who were very successful having it. Jack Layton being probably the most successful. Broadbent was a fairly successful leader, but not anywhere near as effective as Jack Layton. I think the fact that he had it, unfortunately, was the sympathy factor of his dying of cancer. People tend to sympathize with people that are they're in some sort of situation where they're not going to be around for much longer, because the fact is the sympathy factor kicks in as well. Unfortunately, people do have that type of thing going on. Jack was a very charismatic figure. He represented a possibility for the NDP to break through in terms of getting some real representation for his particular party's views of things. It was a crazy time because the Liberals themselves had lost their way quite a bit in terms of the politics of things. So Jack Layton basically was able to opportune himself in being the prevention from the Conservatives taking away a lot more support from Liberals than they could have, because it bled off to them and kept the size of the majority of the Conservative Party more manageable, I guess, for most people's thinking, because, let's face it, there is no fourth real Conservative alternative that weighs like the NDP against the Liberals. The Liberals, in a way, it's a double-edged sword, because at one side, the Liberals right now can use this to stay in power much longer than they probably could otherwise, because of the fact that ideologically these two parties are very similar. In a lot of ways, not totally, but very similar, because they're most left-leaning parties. They're very left-leaning parties. But at the same time, it does provide an scenario where we get these minority governments, because what happens is people that are on the Liberal side now have an alternative that can vote for rather than the Conservatives. And on the Conservative side, the Conservatives for a while did have that same sort of schism, the Reform Party, the Canadian Alliance, and all that, but eventually realized the fact was, in order for you to have a politics that's supposed to be either one side or the other, you have to have a united single party, more or less, that represents the majority views of the people within that constituency group, so you don't have a larger party competing for much smaller parties then. Maxime Bernier party, bless his soul about his party. I mean, he seems like a very, very interesting character. He's got some interesting ideas. He is not going to ever really, I think, become a relevant force like the NDP in terms of creating that type of schism, because the Conservative Party have realized that they need to be very, very careful about these things and phenomena happening within politics. Otherwise, they will be victimized again, like the Liberals were, and like they themselves were, when the Liberals had power because the Conservative was so fragmented. I think Max eventually will have to recognize he'll have to find some way of saving grace and sort of merging back into a more united Conservative Party eventually, as he realizes that his party will become mostly a fringe party. It's not got the gravitas that the Reform Party did in the West. Unfortunately, it does not have the power or the weight or the significance in terms of its cultural relevance to the party and politics to ever pull enough support away to cause the Conservative Party to fracture. The Conservative Party realized that they needed to nip that one in the bud right away. So I could see at some point in time either Rexing will fade off into irrelevance, or someone else will take the party over and decide that they want to make a better chance at it than he did. Or third, the party may end up finding its way back to the Reform Party and the Canadian Alliance and all these other parties, eventually back into the fold and becoming a party, much like the Alberta Conservative Party did as of late. With the ironic thing, the original leader of the Liberals Party becoming now the leader of this new amalgamated party. It's kind of a weird situation when you think about it. The fact that the original Conservative Party and the Liberal Party were two competing parties fighting for the same voice, basically causing the same sort of schism that existed elsewhere. My camera's going off again, so we'll just put it back on. There we go. But the same sort of schism that was before with that type of thing. And then, of course, they eventually recognized the fact that the NDP got into power because of that schism. Very much so, because the Liberal Party was not, Party is not really relevant in Alberta and most of the West, except for maybe places like BC. And because of that, what happened was the NDP managed to get power. And because of that factor, the NDP got power briefly under a new leader because people were just sick and tired of the infighting between the Conservative parties. They wanted to see whether or not, let's give the NDP a try and see maybe they can represent Albertans in a way that we couldn't be. They recognized very quickly that Rachel Notley's party wasn't going to be that type of party. It wasn't the solution to the problems of the Conservative movement in the West. What the real solution was, the Conservative Party itself had to solve its own problem by letting the NDP burn itself out. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party itself managed to sort of schism itself back together under the leadership of Jason Kenney, and of course we all know what happened to him. He ended up expressing his power and becoming too much aligned to the federal government. And unfortunately, that's what cost him his job, ultimately. I think that might be the same fate for any other party. I think Doug Ford may end up eventually finding himself in the same sort of chasm in the Conservative Party. If the Conservative Party numbers do not do well, if he can't sort of distance himself from the Freedom Convoy protests in terms of his involvement in the wanting to stop these protests, now that Justin Trudeau has used him as a useful idiot, basically, from a lot of the comments I've been hearing on other channels. Now that he's been no longer useful to them, now, of course, now he's not wanting to appear at the actual conference for talking about the inquiry, because it would actually reveal the fact that he supported this type of thing, because ultimately he had to do the same as Trudeau, stick his nose at the thing. He was watching the traditional media. He refused to watch alternate media, not necessarily Rebel News, but there are other alternate media out there besides Rebel News. Is just the largest one of them. But there's True North and many other independent, just not affiliated with Rebel News at all, but are very much along the same lines as Rebel News in terms of their coverage of the media in a more comprehensive zone, as opposed to what was happening in the traditional media that was being backed by the government through subsidies and grants and such. So the fact is that he would listen to a lot of the alternate media instead of listening to the traditional media and hoping that most of the people were still there and the people he was talking to, his audience, were also there, and we're looking at the narrative from the point of view of that particular lens, that he had to respond with policies like in kind to that lens, hoping that could appeal to the majority of his constituency. But as we are seeing, the much younger people now are starting to fall away from that. The next generation of voters are not going to be ones watching traditional media, and gentlemen like Doug Ford, an older man himself, is going to probably find himself very quickly replaced, I think, in the future with a much younger, more flamboyant leader, a more pure Poilievre-style leader in terms of his approach to campaigning and his approach to politics and his approach to reaching that. And Justin Trudeau himself will eventually become irrelevant as people realize that he is a representative of the old guard. He is quoting on. He's like a brand name of a cereal that the brand's very, very popular, so people expect because this one's the same brand, it's got to be just as good as the original. They want the nostalgia factor of that, which is what he got in for the most part. He was able to communicate his drama background, did serve him well in that in terms of being a very good actor. And he the role of Prime Minister much like an acting job. But let's face it, that is more or less what he is. He has to have a script. He cannot go off the cuff. He cannot be impromptu. And the most part, a lot of politicians, even Pierre Poilievre, like when I was watching the speeches when he went around with the Conservative leadership, was giving the same sort of message, because, of course, consistency is another thing. And the problem is, you can't just be consistent off the cuff, because the fact of being consistent off the cuff is hard. So having a pre-built template for a speech, because the speech was a little bit customized per region, a little bit trying to make it sort of that he's not sort of just ripping it from a teleprompter. He had to give some sort of fact that he could respond, and obviously when he answered questions, there was a little bit more of a free flowing type of conversation. Then we're talking more ideological as opposed to a sort of general policy-wise thing, which is what he was doing during the campaign. I'm hoping that there'll be more of that sort of off-the-cuff thing where he gives more thoughtful answers to things and looks at the whole thing in a more holistic manner, because ultimately when you go to election, you're going to have to start telling people exactly how you think. The things that the other guy is doing wrong are wrong, and propose solutions that have some sort of gravitas and some sort of reasonable expectation that people can understand as the alternative to the other guy's policies. And then you have to eventually, when you do come to go the old put up and shut up thing, you put up or shut up, and if you put up, you have to put up, and somebody says, hey, you're now the government, now you have to be able to implement these things into actual policy, the things that do actually have to appear out there, and then see whether or not you were right in the first place. And since politics is not a single man sport, Pierre Poilievre is the Prime Minister. If he becomes Prime Minister, as I just knew, it's not a one-man trick pony. He has people around him. You have to basically know that people working with you are going to implement your policies and implement your ideology, have the same like kind of things to the greatest degree possible, and that depends. And then you also have to trust whether or not you want to elect him to pull three, or do you want to be a micromanager, like a lot of people accuse Stephen Harper of being a micromanager. Very much aware of the fact that he wanted to make amply sure that the policies he put in were consistent to his vision, and he couldn't do it alone. He had to rely on people. So the fact was, it was just a question of how much control you let other people have, as opposed to controlling it yourself. And that's like any type of politician, just like Justin Trudeau in terms of messaging. All politicians have the same problem as far as attempting to be consistent in one way or another. So this is what we got. We got all this stuff going on. Plus, on top of that, we got the war in Ukraine. We can't forget that. A lot of the stuff going on in the parliaments of the world is all directly related to the war in Ukraine, the issues of Ukraine, and the fact that we deciding whether we should intervene or not. There's a lot of people think we should intervene because of democracy. But the problem is then we have to define what democracy is and what places are real democracies and what not. What the real interests are. Is it because of democracy, or is a lot of people saying it's because there was oil and resources there, and the Americans and all that want to control that, and of course the Russians also want to control that, and of course there's territorial issues and sovereignty issues, and there's a lot of issues. It's a very complex pile of issues that get involved in that particular situation. And a lot of people are afraid that nuclear war might present it, and maybe it will. Maybe it will. Maybe we'll ultimately end up in a situation where that's the ultimate outcome of the whole thing. I hope not. I really hope not, because the fact is we all know what we got. You people that nuclear energy, nuclear energy is bad. Nuclear energy is a cakewalk compared to nuclear war. I'd rather have a nuclear power plant in my house than a nuclear missile silo. Think about it for a second. Think about which one is going to cause you the most harm in the long run. Maybe if the people in the nuclear anti-debate were to come about from that point of view and think, what would you rather have in your backyard? A coal-fired energy plant spewing out all kinds of carbon all day long to produce power, a nuclear missile silo, which is now making you a potential target of a nuclear attack, and having nuclear energy down there in weapons grade with a rocket, or a nuclear reactor producing clean, cheap, efficient nuclear power for everyone in society, so you can run those electric cars that you all want to run. Think about that question before you really start. And the thing is, most people actually were to think about it and do their research and find out what the implications of all these options are. They maybe not necessarily let people lead them around and tell them that something is bad just because they create a fear-based emphasis on it, well, knowing enough about what's really going on in the world and what the true truth of things are. Get your facts straight. Don't listen to me. Like I said, always. Don't listen to me as anyone else. Don't believe everything I say. Do your own research. if people were to spend more time actually checking out there and looking at research from a lot of different sources, not just from one place, look all around. Do get your facts. Go to science. If it's scientific, go to true science. People that do the science instead of politicians that pretend to do science. Find out as much as you can about something before you're making an opinion. And even when you have an opinion about something, when you think that the facts are as valid as you possibly can, always be ready to be skeptical of those opinions to some degree, and always open to the idea that with new knowledge comes new understanding and new opinions. If people did more of that, we'd have a much better world to live in. And this is the world I hope that someday, when I'm gone, is what's left to my son Cody, his children hopefully someday, my brothers and sisters' children, and all the rest of us out here that are living on this planet for as long as this rock will exist, until we finally get crushed into the sun. By that time, I hope we're all gone to somewhere better. I hope the human beings figure out the fact is that we are smart enough to transcend the trap of this little rock we're on that has been around for a long time. The unfortunate thing is, by the time that happens, all of us, including myself, will be long since gone, buried in the ground, now the basis of new life. Anyway, my camera's went off, so I guess that's probably the best time to wrap things up for this week. Because, like I say, I've got the other camera here. I'm just, like I said, playing with a set right now. I'm just using a 4K. Actually, I'm not using 4K. I'm using an old Logitech camera. That's a 1080p, and I'm using a 1080p video camera. Now, the 1080p video camera gives me a lot more functionality and versatility. I can do zooms and stuff with that. I can also do independent shooting. Right now, because I don't have it in record mode, I'm just using it in standby mode. And in standby mode, it gives you a great image. It works as a great video camera. But unfortunately, what happens after a certain amount of time, it goes to power saving mode to shut itself down because it doesn't know that it's been connected to power. It just thinks it's connected. It's just built in. There's no way to change it. Until I get that changed around, which will hopefully happen once the new studio gets set up and once we start doing some other things here and get some other things going here. I want to eventually upgrade the equipment and upgrade the setup and upgrade the template, and hopefully I don't have an audience to look at. So anyway, this is me for this week. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. For those that are watching it, tell your friends, tell your dogs, tell everybody, tell anyone that want to listen to come and check me out. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully we get to build up an audience here and hope to make this a regular deal. Anyway, this is Mike signing off for another week. Take care and talk to you again soon. Bye for now.